What's the science behind the muscle building morning? There's something I find genuinely interesting about how we talk about muscle building. What you do in the first hour after you wake up. Get that wrong and you're fighting your own physiology, even if your program is perfect. The gym does not build muscle. Cold showers and cold plunges, are they good for your muscle growth? What most people do not realize, one of the most underappreciated advantages of training early in the morning is simply this. Caffeine is one of the most well-researched performance tools available. There is also an interesting downstream. What's the science behind the muscle building morning? There's something I find genuinely interesting about how we talk about muscle building. We spend enormous amounts of time debating training programs, protein timing, progressive overload, and almost no time talking about the thing that determines whether any of it actually works. What you do in the first hour after you wake up. Your morning is not just a warm up to the day, it is setting the hormonal environment that everything else runs on. Get that right, and your training and nutrition will do more. Get that wrong, and you're fighting your own physiology, even if your program is perfect. So today, I want to walk through the actual science behind a morning that supports muscle growth. Not the 4 a.m. cold plunge version, the version that is grounded in how the body actually works. Let's start with sleep, because that is where this has to begin. Sleep is where muscle is actually built. The gym does not build muscle. It creates the conditions for muscles to be built. The actual repair, the growth, that happens at night during your sleep. During deep sleep, growth hormone secretion is at its peak. Muscle protein synthesis increases. The inflammatory load from training starts to resolve, and that is when the adaptation happens. So when sleep is compromised, it is not just a fatigue issue. Recovery is directly impaired, and research on people with chronically poor sleep shows measurably slower muscle gain and fat loss, even when their training and nutrition are identical to people who are sleeping well. Same program, same protein intake, but slower progress just because of poor sleep. Which means improving your sleep is one of the highest leverage changes you can make without changing anything else. Now, let's talk about the morning light exposure and the connection with your sleep. Your body operates on an internal clock, the circadian rhythm. That determines when cortisol rises to create alertness and when melatonin rises to prepare you for sleep. What most people do not realize is that this clock is anchored by the morning light exposure, not by what you do before bed. When your eyes receive natural daylight early in the morning, it sends a signal to the brain's master clock that sets a timer for melatonin to release roughly 14 to 16 hours later. Which means that the quality of your sleep tonight is partly determined by whether you saw daylight this morning. 5 to 10 minutes outside or by a window is just enough. Even on a cloudy day, outdoor light intensity is far higher than indoor lighting. And if sunrise happens much later than your wake time, a 10,000 lux light therapy lamp does the same job. How much sleep do you need? For people doing regular resistance training, the research lands pretty consistently in the same place. If you get below 7 hours, your recovery begins to suffer. Between 7 and 9, muscle protein synthesis, hormonal output, and cognitive function are all working well. If you want to wake up earlier to train, you cannot just subtract from the end of your sleep. You have to shift the whole window. Earlier to bed, earlier to wake, the hours are not negotiable. Let's talk about morning training. Why does that compound? One of the most underappreciated advantages of training early in the morning is simply this. It happens before life has a chance to get in your way. Evening sessions are genuinely vulnerable to late meetings, accumulated fatigue, and the kind of decision fatigue that makes skipping feel very reasonable at maybe 7 p.m., even though it did not at 9 a.m. Morning training removes most of that friction before it can actually build. Now, I want to be honest about the adaptation period because a lot of people try morning training once, have a bad session, and conclude that it just doesn't work for them. Body temperature and neuromuscular activation are both slightly lower early in the morning. The first few weeks may feel harder. Lifts feel heavier, coordination slightly off. That is not a signal that mornings are wrong for you. It is a temporary physiological adjustment. That's it. Research on training timing shows that most people return to their previous performance levels within a few weeks and often improve beyond them, particularly once the sleep routine stabilizes. There is also an interesting downstream effect. Morning exercise has been associated with what researchers call a circadian phase advance, a measurable shift in your internal clock that makes falling asleep earlier easier and waking up feeling more rested. This was found in both morning people and night owls. So, morning training may improve the very sleep quality that drives your recovery. That is a compounding return. Let's talk about caffeine. Timing it right. Caffeine is one of the most well-researched performance tools available. It reduces perceived effort, improves muscular endurance, sharpens your focus, and has a real effect on strength and power output. The practical issue is its half-life, roughly 5 to 6 hours. 200 milligrams at 2 p.m. means around 100 milligrams still circulating at 8 p.m. and 50 milligrams at midnight. For most people, that is enough to meaningfully disrupt sleep architecture, even if they do not feel it consciously. Morning caffeine solves this. It gives the compound enough time to clear your system before your sleep window arrives. 100 to 200 milligrams early in the morning is good enough. And cut it down after midday. The research suggests it is likely affecting your sleep quality even when you cannot really feel it. Now, let's talk about weighing yourself first thing in the morning. Why does that matter? Most people weigh themselves when it is convenient, after work, before dinner, or whenever they remember. And then they wonder why the number is all over the place. Here's the thing. Your body weight can shift by 2 to 4 kilograms in a single day. Food volume, water intake, sodium, whether you trained, all of it moves the number. So if you're weighing yourself at different times, you're not tracking your body properly. You're tracking the chaos of your day. When you weigh yourself first thing in the morning, it fixes this. Right after waking up, after using the washroom, before food, before water, before anything. That is your baseline, stripped of variables, as stable as it gets outside a clinical setting. Now, track that number daily and average it across the week. A slow upward trend of around 200 to 300 grams per week, you're in the right surplus for building muscle. Broadly stable or drifting slightly down, you are in the recomposition territory. And if the weekly average is climbing faster than that, you're likely overshooting your surplus and you need to slow down. The point is not the daily number. The daily number will move around. The point is the weekly direction, the trend. One reading is noise. 7 readings averaged together, that's data. The reason to anchor this to morning specifically is that it becomes automatic. Pair it with something you already do, like using the washroom, brushing your teeth, and it stops requiring any decision at all. 5 seconds every day. And over 3 or 4 months, you will have a feedback loop that most people training seriously would actually pay for. Let's talk about your morning nutrition. The case for protein at breakfast. After 7 to 9 hours of sleep, your body has gone without dietary protein for a meaningful stretch of time. During that overnight fast, muscle protein breakdown gradually begins to outpace muscle protein synthesis. This is a completely normal physiological state. It is not something to panic about. But it does create an opportunity. Your first meal of the day is the chance to reverse that balance and push the body back towards net muscle protein synthesis. There is an interesting research comparing how distributing protein across different meals affects muscle gain. 2 groups, same total daily protein, one with a high protein breakfast, one with most protein at dinner. Both groups gained strength, but the high protein breakfast group showed modestly greater gains in their lean muscle mass. Same total intake, different distribution, different results. You do not need an enormous meal. Somewhere between 25 and 40 grams of quality protein in the morning keeps the body in a building environment from early in the day. Now let's talk about fasted training. Is that really a problem? Fasted training is not inherently problematic for muscle building in most people. The issue is not fasting itself. The issue is actually hunger. Studies show that going into a session in an actively hungry state measurably reduces performance output. If you feel fine training fasted, that's a valid approach. Just prioritize a high protein meal within the first hour after training. If your performance feels off, a small fast digesting snack beforehand is good enough. A piece of fruit and a protein source. Let's talk about cold showers and cold plunges. Are they good for your muscle growth? Cold showers and ice baths have become a fixture of morning routine content. But it is worth understanding what the research actually shows, because it is a little more nuanced than the popular narrative. Cold immersion immediately after training does reduce acute inflammation a lot faster. But that inflammatory response is a part of the adaptation signal. It is your body telling itself to grow stronger. Consistently blunting it may reduce long-term training adaptation, meaning slower muscle growth over a period of time. If you use cold exposure in the morning for mental alertness, separate from training, the muscle growth concern is less relevant. But as a post-training recovery strategy for hypertrophy, the evidence simply does not support it. Here is what I want you to take away from this. None of what we covered today is complicated. Morning light, protecting your sleep, training before the day introduces friction, protein at breakfast, a 2-minute weigh-in first thing in the morning. But what makes these habits genuinely powerful is not any of them on its own. It is how they connect. Morning light anchors your circadian rhythm, which deepens your sleep. Better sleep accelerates recovery and hormonal output. Morning training advances that rhythm further, making the sleep even more restorative. Protein at breakfast keeps muscle protein synthesis running from early in the day. Each habit feeds the next one. And that is the difference between a routine that works and a list of things you are trying to remember to do. When the mechanisms are connected, consistency becomes easier and the results, they start to compound. None of this requires an extreme approach. It requires understanding how the body actually works and then working with it. That is what we are building at The Health Edit. Subscribe if you want to keep going, and I will see you in the next one.